On October 15, 1987, a young president sat inside a quiet room having a normal meeting. Outside, everything was calm, but in a few moments, gunshots would tear through the silence, and his life would come to an end. His name was Thomas Sankara. He was only 37 years old. He was loved by his people, respected across Africa, and feared by those who did not want change. But that day, the real danger was not from foreign enemies or political opponents. It was from someone much closer, someone he trusted, someone he called a brother, a man who once risked everything to put him in power. That man was Blaise Compaoré. This is the story of friendship, of power, and of the day a brother became an enemy. Before the world knew the name Thomas Sankara, before the speeches, before the revolution, there was a country in pain. That country is known today as Burkina Faso. But back then, it was called Upper Volta. And life was not easy. Most people were poor, very poor. Farmers worked hard every day, but they had little to show for it. Children fell sick from diseases that could be prevented. Many families could not even afford basic health care. While the people were suffering, those in power were living comfortably. Government officials drove expensive cars, while villages had no clean water. And even though the country was independent, many decisions were still influenced from outside. It did not feel like true freedom. It felt like a country waiting for someone who would speak for the people and actually mean it. Someone who will not just talk, but act. And soon, that person will appear. We love bringing you African stories every week. If you enjoy them, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share. It really helps us to grow. Long before power, before speeches, before history will remember their names, they were just two young soldiers, Thomas Sankara and Blaise Compaoré. They met in the military in a time when the country was full of uncertainty. Both of them were young, both of them were ambitious, and both of them were tired of the way things were. They saw the same problems: corruption, poverty, leaders who care more about themselves than the people. And slowly, they became close, very close. They talked for hours about what the country could become. A place where leaders would serve the people. A place where dignity mattered. A place where Africans could stand on their own without depending on others. Sankara was different. He was bold. He spoke with passion. He believed deeply in injustice. Compaoré was quieter. He watched more than he spoke. He thought things through. He understood strategy. Where Sankara brought fire, Compaoré brought control, and together they balanced each other. In the barracks, on long nights, through shared struggles, they built something strong. Not just a partnership, but a bond that felt like brotherhood. In 1983, everything changed. Thomas Sankara was arrested. No warning, no fair process. Just like that, he was taken away. His ideas had become too powerful. Too many people were listening to him, and those in control did not like it. For many, that would have been the end, but not for Sankara. Because outside, someone was already making a move, Blaise Compaoré. When he heard the news, he did not stay quiet. He did not step back. He acted quickly, boldly. With soldiers loyal to him, he led a move towards the capital to set Sankara free. It was risky, very risky. If it failed, it could cost him everything. But he did it anyway. Not just for power, but for his friend. And it worked. Sankara was freed. Not long after, the old military leadership was removed, and Sankara was made president at just 33. And right beside him was the man who made it possible. In that moment, their bond was no longer just friendship. It was loyalty, proven under pressure. Trust, tested and confirmed. They had faced danger together and come out stronger, or at least, that's what it seemed. When Thomas Sankara became president, he did not waste time. From the very beginning, it was clear this would not be a normal government. He wanted real change, not promises, not speeches, but action. And people began to see it. Land was taken from powerful elites and given back to farmers. For the first time, many families could truly work for themselves and eat from their own harvest. Then came health care. In a short time, millions of children were vaccinated. Diseases that have been killing people for years began to disappear. He also spoke strongly about women. He said a country cannot move forward if half of its population is left behind. Women were given more opportunities, more respect, a stronger voice, and then something symbolic. He encouraged people to wear local clothes, made in their own country, not imported, not foreign, but something they could call their own. It was about pride, identity, self-reliance. Even in government, things changed. Luxury was reduced. Expensive cars were sold. Leaders were expected to live simply, like the people they served. And then, a powerful step. Upper Volta was renamed to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. This was more than just a name, it was a message, a new beginning. And across the country, many people believed it. For the first time in a long time, there was hope. And standing beside Sankara through it all was Blaise Compaoré. Still loyal, still trusted, still his brother. But change, especially fast change, does not come without a cost. As Thomas Sankara pushed forward with his ideas, not everyone was happy. Some people were losing power, others were losing money. The same elites who once controlled land now has less control. Government officials who were used to comfort were now being forced to live simply. And outside the country, some foreign powers were watching closely. Sankara refused to depend on them. He spoke openly against their influence. He wanted Burkina Faso to stand on its own. That made people uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Slowly, opposition began to grow, not just outside the government, but inside it too. Whispers started, quiet conversations in corners, meetings that did not include Sankara. Some began to say, he's moving too fast, he's taking too many risks, he's not listening anymore. At first it was small, easy to ignore, but over time, those whispers became louder and closer, because now, even the people around him were beginning to doubt. And somewhere in the middle of all this stood Blaise Compaoré, watching, listening, and slowly feeling the weight of everything around him. For Blaise Compaoré, this period was not simple at all. He was still inside the government, still beside Thomas Sankara, still called a trusted friend. But inside him, something was shifting. At first, it was small doubts. He would sit in meetings and listen as Sankara pushed even harder reforms. And sometimes, he would quietly wonder, can this really last? Are we moving too fast? Because the pressure was no longer just from outside, it was everywhere. From angry elites, from worried officers, from foreign voices warning of instability. People were no longer just asking questions. They were giving warnings. And Compaoré was in the middle of it all. He still respected Sankara deeply. That part did not change. But respect is not the same as agreement. Slowly, a new fear began to grow inside him. The fear that the revolution they built together might collapse under its own speed. The fear that the country would fall into chaos. And still worse, the fear that stopping Sankara might become necessary. He did not say it out loud, not yet, but the thought had entered his mind. And once a thought like that enters, it does not leave easily. Still, outwardly, nothing changed. He still smiled in meetings. He still stood beside Sankara in public. He still played the role of the loyal brother. But inside, the distance between them was growing, quietly, slowly, without anyone noticing, yet. By now, the change was no longer hidden, not fully. Thomas Sankara and Blaise Compaoré were still working together, still appearing in public, still sharing the same government. But the closeness they once had was fading, slowly, naturally, without anyone openly saying it. They no longer spent time together like before. No long talks, no relaxed moments, no shared meal that lasted for hours. Even in meetings, something had changed. Sankara would speak with the same fire as always, but Compaoré would listen differently now. Not with full agreement, not with full rejection either, just silence, heavy silence. And sometimes that silence said more than words. Outside the room, people also began to notice. The government felt different, tighter, more tense, like something important was about to break. But no one could tell when. Still, Sankara trusted him deeply. Despite everything he was hearing, despite the growing tension around him, he still believed one thing strongly, that a friend does not betray a friend. But not in politics, Belief is not always protection, and trust does not always stop what is coming. By this time, the situation was already serious. Thomas Sankara was no longer just a president making reforms. He was now a man surrounded by tension and danger. Inside his own system, not everyone was comfortable anymore. And because of that, warnings began to come, quietly at first, then more directly. People close to him started to tell him things. They said there were meetings happening in secret. They said some officers were no longer loyal. They said plans were being discussed, plans that did not include him. But Sankara did not panic. He listened, yes, but he did not fully believe it. Because in his mind, one thing was still strong: trust. Especially trust in Blaise Compaoré. When people suggested that Compaoré could be involved, Sankara rejected it completely. To him, it did not make sense. This was the same man who helped bring him into power, the same man he worked with every day, the same man he called a brother. So he would say words that later became very painful in history. Friends, do not betray each other. But the warnings did not stop. They became louder, more urgent. Still, Sankara stood his ground. He believed that loyalty was stronger than fear, that brotherhood was stronger than politics. But unknown to him, the danger was no longer just a rumor. It was already very close, closer than he ever imagined. For Blaise Compaoré, this was the hardest point in the story, because by now, the pressure was everywhere. Inside the country, people were divided. Some believed in the revolution of Thomas Sankara. Others believed it was becoming too extreme. Outside voices were also adding weight. Warnings, concerns, fear of instability. And inside Compaoré himself, there was a battle. He still remembered the beginning, the friendship, the trust, the nights they talked like brothers. But now that memory was sitting beside a different fear. The fear that everything they built could collapse. And worse, that thousands of lives could be affected if things got worse. People around him were no longer just complaining. They were pushing him. They were saying, this is the only way. He's not listening anymore. The revolution must be corrected. They used strong words, correction. But everyone understood what it meant. Compaoré did not make the decision easily. He struggled with it. He questioned it. He delayed it in his mind many times. But pressure, when it stays long enough, begins to change even strong minds. And slowly, he began to believe something dangerous. That stopping Sankara might be necessary for the country. Not because he hated him, but because he feared what could happen if nothing changed. That is how betrayal begins sometimes. Not with hate, but with fear and justification. And finally, the decision was made. A decision that would change everything. It was a Thursday afternoon. The air was calm, almost too calm. Inside a small meeting room in Ouagadougou, Thomas Sankara was meeting with his team. There was no sign of danger, no warning sound, No clear signal that history was about to change. But outside, something was already moving. Soldiers were taking positions. Orders had been given. And at the center of it all was Blaise Compaoré. Inside the room, Sankara continued the meeting normally. Then suddenly, gunshots, not far away. At first it sounded distant, but within seconds it became clear. This was not random. This was planned. People in the room froze. Some stood up. Some looked confused. But Sankara did not panic. He understood immediately. He turned to those with him and said calmly, "Stay here. It's me they want." Then he stood up. He was unarmed. He walked out of the room slowly, not running, not hiding, just walking. Outside, the tension was heavy. Soldiers were waiting. And when he appeared, everything happened very fast. Shots were fired. Thomas Sankara was struck down, along with several of his closest companions. Silence followed immediately after. A kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. In that moment, a revolution stopped, and a friendship ended forever. After the gunshots faded, nothing was same again. The news spread quickly across the country, and the story people heard was not the truth. Inside the government, power changed hands immediately. Blaise Compaoré became the new leader. Just like that. No long process, no national calm, just a sudden takeover. And one of the first things that happened was the rewriting of the story. Thomas Sankara was no longer called a hero. He was called a traitor, a man who was dangerous, a man who had lost control, a man who needed to be removed. But that was not what the people remembered, because in many hearts, they still knew what he stood for. His body was taken away quietly, buried in secrecy. No public honor, no proper goodbye, just silence and fear. Life under the new government continued, but something had changed in the atmosphere of the country. People spoke more carefully. People trusted less. And many began to wonder what really happened that day. Behind closed doors, one question refused to go away. How did a brother become the man behind his death? And the answer was not simple, because betrayal is never simple. It is slow, it is painful, and sometimes it comes from the people you trusted the most. After that day, Blaise Compaoré remained in power, not for a few years, but for a very long time, 27 years, almost 3 decades of leadership. In those years, the direction of Burkina Faso slowly changed. Many of the ideas that Thomas Sankara once fought for began to fade away. Policies were adjusted. Relationships with foreign powers were rebuilt. The strong push for self-reliance became less visible. Life became more stable in some ways, but for many people, something felt missing. The energy of change, the boldness, the feeling that the country could stand completely on its own. It was not the same anymore. And as the years passed, the memory of Sankara did not disappear. In fact, it grew stronger. At first it was quiet. Stories told in homes, whispers among young people, old speeches shared secretly. But over time, it became something bigger, a symbol, a reminder of what once was and what could have been. Meanwhile, Compaoré ruled on, carrying the weight of leadership and perhaps the weight of his decision. Because no matter how long power lasts, the past does not stay buried forever. As the years went by, something began to change in Burkina Faso. A new generation started to rise. Young people who were not even born when Sankara was alive began to ask questions. They wanted to know what really happened, not just the official story, but the truth. They listened to old recordings. They read forgotten speeches. They heard stories from their parents and elders. And slowly, Sankara's name came back into public memory, stronger than before. He was no longer just a former leader in history books. He became a symbol of courage, a symbol of honesty, a symbol of a leader who lived differently. At the same time, pressure also began to build on Blaise Compaoré. After many years in power, people were no longer silent. They wanted change again. In 2014, protests began. At first, they were small. Then they became massive. People filled the streets. Voices grew louder. Demands became clearer. And for the first time in decades, the system that has stood for so long began to shake. Eventually, Compaoré left power. And just like that, an era ended. But what remained was something deeper than politics. It was memory. Because even though time passed, the story of Sankara never truly ended. In the end, the story of Thomas Sankara is not just about politics. It is about friendship, it is about trust, and it is about how power can test even the strongest bonds. He believed in a simple idea that a friend does not betray a friend. But history showed something more complicated. Because beside him was Blaise Compaoré, a man who once stood as a brother, a man who struggled deeply with the decision he made, a man who chose fear over certainty and never escaped the weight of that choice. One man died with his vision still burning. The other lived many years with the consequences of his decision. But even death was not the end of Sankara. Because while they tried to erase his name, they could not erase his impact. Today, his voice is still remembered, his ideas are still discussed, and his image still appears across Africa as a symbol of courage and honesty. And so, the final question remains, not just for history, but for every generation. What is stronger? Power or principle? Fear or truth? And in the silence of that question, the story of two brothers comes to an end.